Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Zosha. You're back in Warsaw. Hello, my future family. Here's another record of what Chris was doing in the workshop one day. Today, for us on the internet, I want to talk about carbide versus traditional tools. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there on YouTube, and I'd like to compare them in a little bit more detail than normally people do. And I'd like to talk about why really, this is the executive summary, if you just want to skip to the end of the video, why really you should learn both. Okay, don't pick one or the other, use both. So what I've noticed is that a lot of wood turners who've been doing this for 30-35 years will say, oh, I only use traditional tools, I don't use carbides. Carbides are just scrapers, you get a terrible surface off them. But then there's another group of very experienced turners like Jimmy Clues, like Glenn Teagle, who absolutely embrace the carbide tools as well as the traditional tools, even though they've mastered the traditional tools. So why might they do that? I think carbide tools get a very bad reputation because they're so much easier to learn than traditional tools that they tend to be picked by beginners these days. They do leave a bad surface. Typically, they leave a much worse surface than traditional tools. Not always the case, but often they do. And so you see beginners doing a lot of sanding compared to the experienced wood turners. So I think they have picked up a bad reputation. But let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the two. So these are the three carbides I use on a regular basis. And these are from Glenn Teagle in the UK. However, I've changed the tips on these, so I just want to talk a bit about each one in turn. So first of all, probably the most common is, hopefully you can see that, a round tip carbide tool. Now the one that I originally purchased has a flat surface. This one has a very slightly chamfered surface. It's a negative rake round carbide scraper. The reason I use that is because it tends to catch a lot less. There are ways to use the flat one safely, which involves angling the tool, but these tools are designed, they're square, so these tools are really designed to be used flat. Glenn does make one with an angled round scraper, but he doesn't sell to Europe anymore, so I've only got the flat one. So instead of that, I use a chamfered beta negative rake, which fits nicely into that tool. Next one, same thing for the square. I always had a love-hate relationship with the square scraper. In this particular case, I found a Chinese manufacturer directly. If anyone's interested, I can give you the details to contact them, but I found a Chinese manufacturer that does these square ends. Now, is there any way you're going to be able to see this? So you should be able to see that this has a radius on it. It's not quite square, which means that you don't suddenly get the full impact of the square scraper. It touches a little bit and then you can push as hard as you wish. Secondly, it's also got, you probably can't see that at all, even against the white over there, but it's got a negative rake on it as well. So it's curved in two directions. This is so much easier to use than the traditional square carbide tools, and I recommend that everyone gets this kind of rounded square carbide. The third one is called the diamond point, or sometimes the detail tool. Now it's obviously called the detail tool. In this case, I haven't changed the tip of it. It's the original tip from Glenn Teagle. So it's called the detail tool for obvious reasons. You can take this point, you can push it into the work, and you can get a little ring of detail. And what is not commonly said about this tool is it's great for hogging out material as well. It's also great for setting depth, so it's good to get your initial depth in a bowl, for instance, in the center by using this tool, continuously moving it into the center until you've got that center hole, and then you can use a traditional tool to hog out material. I'll talk a bit more about this when I come to talking about digital woodworking, which is digital wood turning, which is kind of a weird phrase I use for the way in which I can form unusual shapes. And then my traditional tool list that I've got here, I've got a bowl gouge, because I mainly do bowls. So I've got a bowl gouge from, in this case, it's a cryogenic from Crown Tools. I don't like the grind on it, but I might alter that at some point. I've got a bowl scraper. Not sure who this is from. It says Dynamic. I've got a bowl scraper, and essentially the curve on this allows me to scrape the insides of bowls once I've turned them with my chisel on my carbides to get a smoother surface before entering sanding. I see, of course, the skew. Quite sharp at the moment. The reason it's sharp is I don't use it a lot. Can be used, I think the main purpose of the skew really for me is for making detail work, so beads and coves, using the skew, which can get into places that a traditional chisel would have a difficult time getting into. So these are the tools. So I've got a piece spinning here, and I haven't started work on this piece yet. It is a piece of Orzechowskia, European walnut. It's a piece of European walnut attached to a piece of epoxy, and I'm going to make a salad bowl out of it. So we have two types of materials on the lathe. So the first point I'd like to make is that when you're using multiple materials, by far the best tool for mixing epoxy and wood is a carbide. If you've got soft metals in there, such as brass, carbide again. These are the best tools for dealing with mixed materials. I would also add that if your round carbide is slightly dulled, it's going to leave a rough surface on the wood, but it's going to deal with the epoxy quite well until the epoxy is nice and smooth. So I would advise using a slightly dull edge on epoxy. Otherwise, the carbides can be a bit grabby on the epoxy. I will typically, so on this piece, what am I planning to do? I will typically get this down to round using the round carbide tool. I find that the traditional chisels are designed so that you can ride the bevel, and you hear everybody saying ride the bevel, right? And actually it's the major advantage of a traditional tool, one of its two major advantages. But there is no bevel to ride when you're initially shaping the object when it's rough. And you'll often see woodworkers, wood turners, just pulling the tool towards them, either through using their body or using their hand, just pulling it at an angle to shape the initial piece. So I don't find there's really that much of advantage for the initial piece anyway with the traditional tools, and so I'll use the round carbide for that. If I'm doing spindle work or I wanted a complicated shape, I'll often approximate it digitally. That is, I'll create steps into the piece using both the square tool and the detail tool to get down and approximate the surface, rather like a line on a digital monitor. It's not quite a straight line, it's made of pixels and steps in the right direction. I come from an engineering background. I find it quite easy to approximate things with a digital surface before smoothing out that digital surface. I will therefore tend to use these if I've got complicated shapes to make along the spindle. I don't imagine I'll be doing that on this piece, so once I've got it to roughly smooth, I'll then start using the gouge. And the reason I will use the gouge, the main reason I'll use the gouge, is I'm still hogging out material at this point. I'm still getting that initial shape. I've got it to round, but now maybe I want some OGs or something like that. The major advantage of these tools over carbides is that you can ride the wood. So once you've got the bevel on there, I don't want to cut anything here, but once you've got the bevel on a nice round piece, maybe on here I can illustrate it better, yeah. Once I've got the bevel on a nice round piece, I can lean into that and I can use that to support what I'm doing. Can't do that with a carbide. With a carbide, you're sort of working in mid-air, which is fine. A lot of wood turning is done in mid-air, especially when you've got pieces that are uneven or have, you know, a shape other than round. But doing it all the time can be laborious and slow. Bear in mind that with a carbide there's nothing really supporting where it's going to go. Sure, you've got the edge of the tool here, but that isn't really what you're riding. Really what you've got is the tip, and you're riding the tip. So you lean in a bit too hard and a lot of material can suddenly disappear and you've got a very uneven surface. That doesn't happen when you're riding the bevel on a gouge. So when you're riding the bevel on the gouge, you don't suddenly jump into the wood. Of course you can get catches, but that's a different issue. But you don't suddenly jump into the wood and take more material away. That's very problematic with the carbides and something you have to practice a lot. Now let's talk about the second major advantage of traditional tools, a gouge. You've done your work using your carbides, you've got your shape, you're going to have usually quite a rough surface with some tear out. Taking away a few cuts with a tool like this, a bowl gouge, will give you a much cleaner surface ready for sanding at a higher grit. I'm still improving that, but at least I can cut out one level of sandpaper by applying the gouge as the last thing that touches the wood. You know, they always say that there's only one, forget it, bad joke. The skew, I will often use a skew as a scraper. On the outside spindle turning, I'll use it to get a flat surface. The carbides don't present much surface area. The skew presents a lot more, and rather like the bowl scraper, that is a very useful thing to have, that kind of steadiness as you're working along, and get rid of those bumps and troughs. And then lastly, once I've finished with the gouge, I will swap to the traditional scrapers, not the carbide, for the very reason I've just described. Especially on the inside of the bowl, I'll be using this. I use very light cuts, but I'll take those bumps and troughs out that I haven't maybe been skilled enough to get with the gouge. So the truth is that's the complete set of tools that I will use to turn this salad bowl. 3 traditional, 3 carbide. Each has their strengths and weaknesses, and each is used for a specific purpose, and it is better at that purpose than the other tools. It is not the case that the traditional tools are better. It is not the case that carbide are better, but there are different circumstances under which you want to use them. And I hope, using this as an illustration, I've been able to show some of the circumstances under which you'll use it. I've remembered the joke now. There is only one important cut in a wood turning. That's the very last cut, and the one after it. Yeah, I'm not very good at jokes, obviously, but yeah. So gouge does the very last cut, and then the scraper does the one after that, traditional scraper. So for surfacing, traditional tools. For many of the other features, it's a choice. Mixed materials, carbides, every time. Unusual shapes with overhangs, carbides. You're never going to see a hollowing gouge. You're going to see a hollowing carbide. Let me just get one up here. Here we go. Hollowing carbide. There's a reason that hollowing tools are made from carbide. But it's not just for hollowing. I think one of the things that traditional wood turners often forget is that beads and coves go hand in hand with the tools. The tools exist and are the way they are because you want beads and coves exist because the tools are the way they are. Carbide opens up other possibilities other than beads and coves, including semi-hollow bowls, and including lips that come off a bowl and you've worked your way inside the lip as it folds over the bowl. Things that a traditional tool would find very, very difficult to do. So carbides open up a possibility of they open up more modern possibilities for shaping, essentially. So I think that's all I want to say today. I'd be interested if anyone wants to drop an opinion in the comments, anything I might have forgotten. I think that a lot of you will probably wonder why I didn't speak about sharpening. Sharpening is worth a video by itself. It takes a long time to learn to sharpen traditional tools, and people will claim you can't sharpen carbides, but it's not true. Some carbides you can sharpen easily, much more easily than traditional. Others are much harder. So I think that's worth a separate video. Okay, that really is all I want to say today. So I hope some of this has been useful, and I hope it's shown relative newcomers that you really need to consider both types of tools to be successful, and that there is no absolute use this type or use this type. Each has their strengths and weaknesses, and unfortunately you really should learn how to use both. Alright, so goodbye for now. Wherever you are, stay safe and enjoy your turning. Bye bye now.